Hello and welcome again to this edition of FLITV. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We are coming to you from Florida Internet and Television's headquarters, just a few blocks from Florida's capital. I am joined by Ryan Tyson, Vice President of Political Operations for Associated Industries of Florida. He is a counselor to many in the process, but now he's here to tell us about recent elections and also what we're going to expect to see over the summer. Ryan, welcome.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we're here. We're in the middle of session, but elections are still happening. They've been happening. They're not at the normal election time. They're just causing everyone, all sorts of...
They never stopped. Let's be clear. They never stopped.
Okay, so let's jump into the special elections first. We're going to start there. So, and by the way, I'll give the caveat. Like what we're talking about today could all change tomorrow. I'll do that on your behalf. But so we're going to start with these specials and walk us through where they've been, what they tell us, who's been affected, and how the parties are playing in them.
Sure. Well, I think the hardest thing to put into context here is it hasn't just been the special election to replace Alex Miller in House District 72, which is in Sarasota. We've had a lot of them. So I jotted a couple of them down. Essentially, they've went through 3 of the major media markets in the state. We've had specials in Miami, Senate and House. We have an upcoming special coming up in the House in Miami. Had a primary for it just last night. We've got a special House election in Orlando. We've had 2 now in Tampa. So there's been a lot. You're hearing about the ones where a lot of resources from the left and the right, competitive if you would, were poured into. It's predominantly Senate District 40 and then the recently House District 72.
That was a big, let's start with Senate District 40. That was a huge upset, if you will. Right.
Yeah, it was a big upset. There was a lot of money that was dumped in on the Republican side. I think conventional wisdom all said that the Republican, because of the amount of money, he was a great candidate, shouldn't have a problem being able to pull this special off. But yet on Election Day, there was a turnout. You can call it a wave if you'd like. We found in our data.
The term wave is definitely
being used
heard.
a lot.
Right.
But normally, if you head into, in a special election, if Republicans head into a special, especially in Miami-Dade County, and they have an electoral advantage, you wouldn't expect that on election day that would fall off. Usually, historically, when you prepare for elections and you study them, it's the exact opposite. Republicans tend to surge on the day of. That didn't happen in this instance. I don't remember off the top of my head, but Senator Taddeo took election day by the high teens, if I remember. So that was a big sign that day. But we had one up in Orlando that actually is a seat that Secretary Clinton defeated President Trump in 2016, and the Democrat candidate in that race was, even though a judge didn't rule on this motion from what I understand, but a lawsuit was filed. He wasn't constitutionally eligible to serve in the legislature because apparently he cast a vote in the state of Missouri. I point out that seat because I think it's important to remember as you're looking at specials. If you have a seat and the resources, as we saw with Margaret Good, current Representative Margaret Good in Sarasota with the election we just had, if you're able to raise money from around the country, if you're able to focus finite resources in one place and there's nothing else that's going on, you can make all kinds of wonderful things happen, especially if there's a dip in Republican turnout, which we saw here. Spike in Dem turnout, dip in Republican turnout.
But there you go. When reality hits, and there's a million other things that play in.
Harder to do. I think what you have to point out is, what I would point out is, these have been big wins for the Democrats. Nobody can take that away from them. But once you get into the regularly scheduled election, there's 20 or 30 competitive races, if you want to call it competitive with air quotes. But races where there are bodies and there's resources being pummeled in, there's noise from the top down to the bottom. I think you have to be realistic.
Let me ask the question though, because if I'm feeling optimistic because the Democrats are making this move, are these victories scalable? Like do you see infrastructure in place that they can scale to an infrastructure or a plan that can play out on these 30? Or when you say realistic, you say...
let me say it this way. I think you could theoretically. But it takes 3 groups of people distinctly that the Democrats are going to have to organize and engage that have been hard for them to do so dating back to 2006, the last time there was a supposed national blue wave. Can they organize millennials? We've seen a dip in their organic involvement in voter registration over the last 3 to 4 years. Can they organize African American voters? We've seen a dip in their participation over the last couple of years, and then single females. I think a Democrat, if he was standing on the set with us today, would say, absolutely, these are the people who are most offended by President Trump, and they're ready to turn out and they're ready to send a message. We'll see if it happens.
What do the numbers show in these elections? Is it those millennials that are turning out to make the difference?
No, sir.
Who's making the difference?
Special elections all become about whose supporters have been identified and who's turning out. These are a mix of high likely voters that typically show up in all kinds of elections, and there's also a mix on both sides of non-typical voters who have vote by mails that are left over from the 2016 election. So
it's the unpredictable.
It's because it's
as much as somebody that does what you do doesn't want to say it's unpredictable, but it's
true.
The reality.
It's true. It's the reason why at AIF our job is not to carry the water for either party per se, but we try to look at the facts and we try to explain to the business community the facts as best as we understand them. And at this point, we know mathematically in all of these districts, there's a certain R+ electoral advantage, R+ meaning their advantage in the number of voters that have turned out, that has to be achieved or they mathematically don't have the lift to win.
Right.
And if you don't reach it, be it because of your candidate, be it because of atmosphere, the bottom line is you ain't got the math.
Right.
And for us, the math wasn't achieved in many of these races. And the question is, as we head into the general election, our analysis is pretty simple. If you're going to see a blue wave happen in Florida, you're going to need two variables that occur. You're going to need to see a spike in Democrat turnout and a dip in Republican turnout. For my shop, what we're going to be watching throughout this entire election cycle is going to be both of those variables, so any signs that we can get a hold of. And this far out, these special elections push a narrative that there could be something coming from the left. But I would also offer that there are many other data points that you can have access to. I would mention voter registration, where we are seeing signs that there are older whites that are starting to flood back to the state. We're seeing people that are, identifying more Republicans and new registrants than Democrats.
So let's stop on the Republicans for a second, because now they're facing a blue wave, either perceived or real. What do you see that side of the team in Florida politics gearing up for in light of the next special, or really the game plan for the big?
On the Democrat side?
On the Republican side. Like, how are they countering? How do you see them digesting this and countering it?
If I had to sum that up in one word, it would be they're steady. I feel like the sense that I get is that there's a lot happening right now that's causing, whether it's the perception or the reality of a lot of volatility in the atmospheric conditions. And I feel that as you look around at all of the electeds and the leadership, there just appears to be a sort of a steady as she goes for now. I think that's the best way I can answer it at this point. We're too far out to know one way or the other if a historic Democrat wave of epic proportions that has no basis in history, modern history, is about to occur, or if the actions of the history of the last 3 or 4 midterms in this state continue.
We'll predict it. Okay, all right. Well, knowing that certainty, which you've just laid out as our menu, let's apply those same facts that you see out there to the statewide races. Let's start at the top of the ticket. The seat for Florida's governor is in play, both right and left. You pick a side and start on the side and kind of just walk us through who all the players are and where are they standing.
Sure. I think the thing that I like to point out is that, and I hope I get my dates right here, but I said in a speech earlier last year, if you look at midterms in Florida, they're really pink. They're really not blue at all. They're not even really purple if you think about it. I mean, the last 2 elections that the governor had were considerably closer. But the last statewide Democrat to hold the mansion was elected in 1994, I believe. And I believe he was born back in the 30s or the 40s. And he's now passed. But it's important to point out that there is a binge problem, it would appear, on the left. We have a stable of Democrat candidates that are out there right now. They're all fighting to be the most progressive, credible progressive candidate on the left. But I will point out that when you look at midterms, they have a hard time. Their best candidate in 2014 was former Republican Governor Charlie Crist. And I mention that because heading into this midterm, I think it starts there. Who is going to be, for them, their nominee that's at the top of the ticket? Obviously, it's going to be Bill Nelson in one sense, but who will they be able to pick to be that progressive voice that they all rally behind? And the selection of that candidate, you start to look into the demographics of what midterms in Florida typically look like. There's normally a Republican advantage, but maybe this is the year that it's not. There's normally a very wide electorate, considering when you compare to presidential years. The dynamics get tough in midterm.
Right.
They're lower turnout elections by definition. And to me, we're going to be watching that really carefully, because candidate selection out of that Democrat primary is going to go a long, long way.
Right. So if you look at trends, right, the kind of that interim trend, if you will, of mid-cycle elections, the trend leans, like you said, pink to the red, to the Republican favor.
I mean, you can't deny that.
But these last few show, sparks of blue opportunity, if you will.
Sure.
So the trick will be is how does that play? Okay, so when we're in that governor space, who's the top two contenders on both sides, and how do we see that continuing to break?
I think
top two or three.
Sure, top two or three. I mean, if we look at just candidate viability right now, I think on the Republican side, there really are only two. It would be Congressman Ron DeSantis and then Commissioner Adam Putnam. Speaker Corcoran is up on TV with ads right now. He hasn't announced yet. I assume he will. So if he does, he's got considerable amount of money in the bank. He would be one of those two or three. All I'll say is in this primary right now is that there's going to be a lot of money that's spent in it. There's going to be a lot of missiles fired. The winner will be the most credible conservative that comes out and is able to message. I doubt anyone's going to get anywhere close to 50%, especially if it's a three-way or more. That primary it's going to be competitive.
And we just recently saw some polls where it showed DeSantis catching up dramatically close to Commissioner Putnam, who had been the money favorite, but again he started before everybody. So if you had to put any credence into those polls, I mean, what do you see in the numbers?
I would say that those polls, not remembering a lot of their numbers off the top of my head, but if they're showing a tightening ballot, they would be accurate.
All right. So we're getting down on time, but let's jump into the D side real quick. So the governor's race, who's leading that?
Interesting scenario over there. You've got former Congresswoman Gwen Graham. You now have former Miami Beach Mayor Philip Levine, who's been up on air for quite some time.
Right.
He's been up on media now earned media for a couple of months, paid media, forgive me, for a couple of months. Then you've got Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum, and then Chris King. I'd say it's probably about three of those candidates are up right now that are catching our attention: Graham, Levine, and Gillum at this point.
Okay, all right. So in light of the time we've got left, let's dig into the Rick Scott factor.
Absolutely.
Right. So what does that do if he goes for Senate? I mean, how do you want to talk?
I got this question in a speech I was giving the other day, and this is really. I came into politics on the professional side when the governor was elected back in 2010. So he's been in every tracking poll I've ever done statewide. This is a story of a man who got elected as an outsider, and he's built his own brand in this state. Whether you like him, love him, or hate him is sort of irrelevant, because too many Floridians these days look at him and say he did what he said he was going to do. I mean, truth be told, he was the Donald Trump before Donald Trump. And I like to look at this electorate coming up. To me, nothing else matters for Republicans until he makes a decision. If the governor decides to run for U.S. Senate, he's got a success story that he uniquely can tell that no one else can. And I've heard it said this way, and I totally agree with it. He has the ability to create a weather pattern around him with his ability to raise funds and his ability to tell a story that at this point, it's pretty successful.
Well, so when we think about the kind of the parting thoughts, if you will, what do you want, the citizens of Florida to buckle up for, if you will, during this election cycle, other than just gross amounts of mail in their mailbox?
Well, there'll be a lot of TV too. Let's be clear about that.
Yes, cable TV.
Lots of cable TV as well.
Yes.
And I think the most important thing to tell you is lock and load. It's going to be a typical competitive purple state election cycle. Highly doubt that the winner of the top ticket races in November are going to be winning by any large margins whatsoever. Our state's history going back to 2008 tell us those days are long gone. Right. So it's going to be noisy, it's going to be loud, and hopefully folks will tune into cable and get their information.
Hopefully, they're totally going to. All right, well, no need for nail clippers because we'll all be biting them down to the stuff. All right, well, Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today's program. Hit us up on our Facebook or our Twitter feed at FLInternetTV. And for now, thanks for tuning in.